Hello, my name is Dante Gasson, and I will be interviewing Miss Josephina Lago today, March 6, 2009, at Homestead Senior High. Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Um, First off, we want to ask, do you remember any of your life in Cuba prior to coming to the United States?
Yes, I do because I left when I was 16 years old. So I was old enough to remember everything that happened. You want me to continue?
Oh yes, elaborate,
Okay,
please.
yes,
Feel free.
elaborate on that. Um, well, my life in Cuba was very nice. Uh, my parents my father was a lawyer, and he had also a dairy farm. He was a businessman. And my mother was a housewife, and she played the piano as a hobby. And we were not happy with the situation in Cuba when Batista was in power because he was a dictator. So the people of Cuba helped Fidel Castro to overthrow Batista. And we were most of the people were with the revolution at the beginning, but then there were a lot of things starting to happen, like uh, uh, people that were in the army with Batista were getting shot without being judged or anything. There were a lot of injustice happening. The revolution was supposed to have elections, and it was supposed to be a democracy, but it never happened. He was promising. So Fidel Castro betrayed the Cuban people. And when this situation started, like we didn't have any liberty. So my parents started worrying about what was going to happen to me because there were rumors that the children were going to be sent um, to the countryside to alphabetize, and they were going to be taken away from the parents. In other words, the government will have the authority over your children. So and some of them would be sent to Russia for um, indoctrination. So my parents got worried. My father, when he saw that this was happening in his country, he started working for the underground, for the people that wanted to bring about a change in Cuba again, against the Castro brothers. So he was, the CIA was also helping um, uh, the underground. So there were people trained in the United States infiltrated in Cuba, and they were trying to help when the Bay of Pig invasion came. And so I was aware of all of that happening in Cuba at that time. So I was going to a private school, a Catholic school, and all the Catholic schools were closed, or nothing private was left. So what we did was we moved to an area called Varadero Beach, and we had a little cottage there. And I started going to a school there, and my parents were helping the underground, and they were keeping in my other the Havana house. They were keeping some of these people that came. They were smuggled in Cuba, and so when Bay of Pig came, and the United States government did not support like they promised all these 1,000 or 2,000 men. They were supposed to give them air um, support, to uh, bombard and help them uh, get ahead with their invasion, Kennedy decided that he was not going to do it, and these men were killed, most of them, and were prisoners. For the, and so some of them died in trucks when they were transporting them to Havana, because they put them like cattle in. So there were a lot of suffering. My father was waking up, we were waking up in the middle of the night, and he was taken from my house. And they took the car. They didn't know where they were taking him, because they knew that he was against the revolution. And so the next morning, my mother and I had to go in bicycles to find where my father was, to the different police stations. And they had put him in a chicken farm. They had taken the chickens out, and they had put all the prisoners. These were people that they knew that were against the government, and they were fumigated for lice, like animals. After the invasion was a failure, then my father was let go. They let him go. But we were living in kind of a terror situation, because we knew that any moment they could take my father, and I would never see him again, or they would, they would kill him or shot him without being judged or anything. So they decided that I was not going to have a good life in Cuba, that I was to go to the United States. And then there was this priest, Father Walsh, in Miami, and he knew of the situation in Cuba from some teachers that had American high schools there. And the American government, the CIA, with Father Walsh, they started giving visas through the American embassy, so these children could come to the United States. So they first started coming, and they were going to relatives that had already left, or they were getting scholarships in schools. But as the situation got worse, there were more children that the parents wanted them to come. So then the Catholic Church and other businesses, and they gave the money to find places to put these children that were coming without their parents. And so I don't know if you want me to, or do you have any more questions? Do you want me to? Because
Continue.
Do you want me to continue?
Yes.
Well, wait, I have a question. As a child, at the age of 16, having to leave your home where your parents and your family is, what did that do to you mentally?
Well, it was sad, because I was an only child, so I didn't know. I was very protected by my parents, so I thought, I couldn't live there in Havana because I didn't like for the government to tell me what to do. I appreciated my freedom, and I was losing my freedom. And my parents were going to be in jail because they were against the government. So I said, well, I just obey what my parents decided for me. So when it was hard, because when finally they gave me the visa, it was hard because they at the airport they would keep you for long hours. It was not like a short trip, they would keep you, and they were and of course I had a student visa, so they were letting me go, but I could only bring like 50 pounds of clothes, and the thing that I didn't know when I was going to see my parents again was very difficult. So when I was crying the whole time that I was in that fishbowl until I arrived to Miami. I was crying the whole time in the plane, and then when I got to the airport, they picked me up and they took me to a camp. And there were other kids there, and they all were crying. So it was a very emotional time because everybody was sad because we didn't know what the future was. So I was lucky that I had an aunt here in Miami, and she took me in. My aunt took me in, and she already had her husband, her daughter, her daughter's husband, her niece, with her husband and another. So the house was really overcrowded, but they still they said, we don't know where they're going to send you, because at the time there were no more scholarships. So I either was going to have to go to a foster home or to an orphanage. And I was lucky that my family said, no, we will take you in. But while I was in this situation here, my father was in jail. They took him because he was coming from an embassy, because he was trying to help one of the underground freedom fighters. He was trying to get them in the embassy because that was the only way he could get out of Cuba. So my father was coming out of the embassy, and they caught him, and my mother didn't know where he was for about a week, and he was interrogated day and night. And finally, the ambassador from this embassy went and talked and said, no, this is a friend of mine, you have to let him go. So he was let free. And since my father was helping the CIA, they got him a visa to get out of the country. So 40 days after I arrived, my family came out. And I was very fortunate because we were able to be together, and the American government, they gave us $100 a month to live. And so there were hardships. We lived in a garage turned into an apartment, and I didn't know much English, just what I have learned in school. So I went to the Lindsay Hopkins at night, and my father got a job riding a tractor in the Everglades. So he had to travel like 3 hours both ways. So he had to leave early in the morning, and my mother found a job as a maid in Miami Beach. So it was very hard, and I tried to find different jobs, but I tried in a candy store. Where you would where you would pack the chocolate candies in the paper like Lucy did, but I didn't make it. I was very happy to have this job, but I didn't make I was supposed to make so many, and I was short of making what was supposed. So and I found different jobs, and since I didn't know enough English, I was let go, but finally I found a job as a bookkeeper, and I was able to, since I didn't have to speak much, I was able to work with numbers and get ahead in life. Any more questions?
So you're now in America, you're holding down jobs, your mother and father are holding down jobs. At any point in time, did you have a thought of going to school, education, really?
Yes, I was going to the Lindsay Hopkins was like a vocational school. So I was working, and I was going to school at night, and I was learning English, I was learning typing. What I was learning is a job that could get me to make money so I could help my parents, because my parents my father didn't have a steady job, my mother didn't. She also went to the factories, as a seamstress. She worked there. So I got a good job at this furniture company, and I worked there as a bookkeeper until uh, until I met my husband, like 3 or 4 years later. And we got married, and we moved to New Orleans, and we raised a family there.
Very nice. And so you said you moved to New Orleans.
Right.
And how was it there? Was it a big change from being in Miami?
Well, it was a change because in Miami there were a lot of Cubans, and there was they were starting to relocate the Cubans to New Orleans, and the weather was different. It was colder there, but we tried to make the best of everything, and I think. The lesson we learned is that you have to be positive. At the beginning, we were always thinking about going back to Cuba, but after the missile crisis, we knew that that was not going to be possible. So my parents had a harder time because they were in their 50s. My father didn't speak English. He was a lawyer, but he got a job in New Orleans relocating the Cubans to New Orleans, and he was helping them through the Catholic Church. He was helping them get jobs and apartments, and he was helping relocate them to New Orleans. So, and my mother found a job as a seamstress, and I was working in a shipping company. As a shipping clerk or something like that. Okay.
So, currently, are you employed, retired?
I'm retired. I moved to Miami 3 years ago, and the reason I came to Miami was because we wanted to be close to my family. My husband's family, they live here, and I have a son that lives here. And we wanted to be closer to the Cuban community also, and I love the beach, so this was an attractive place for me to be.
Indeed. So, how many children do you have?
I have 2 children, and I have a daughter that is 38 and a son that is 39. They're both married. They have 4 grandchildren. And my daughter is an industrial psychologist, and my son he has a business degree, and he's a national sales manager of a Chilean company that brings salmon from Chile. And my husband used to be an engineer, and now he's working again. He had to come out of his retirement. And he has a position of erection manager of a plant that they're building in Fort Pierce.
Okay. Well, not to go back to what was said on before, I noticed you got a little emotional, but what were your thoughts as you were transported from your home into the United States of America? What was going through your mind in the actual moments?
Well, I was very uncertain of my future. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I was hoping that I would get a scholarship. That's what I was hoping to. But it never happened. I was hoping that I could, but I was glad that my family took me in, because I have other friends that they had gone to orphanages, and that will really affect them for life, because it was they were taking good care with their parents, and then all of a sudden they were put in places with troubled kids, and In some cases, they were separated, like brothers and sisters. They were separated in different areas. So there, I have this book called Operation Peter Pan that I read. So I know a lot of what some uh, children went through. Some of them were happy. They were they got adjusted very well to the American families. And when their parents came from Cuba, it had passed 4 or 5 years, and they had to reacquaint themselves. Some of the kids came when they were 6 years old, so they didn't know. Is this the end?
No, keep on.
So they didn't know. They were young. They didn't remember the parents. So so it was very traumatic. And I recommend, if you want to learn more about what happened to these other children, to read this book. And it's by Yvonne Conde, Operation Pedro Pan. And some of the people, this is interesting, that helped us get out of Cuba ended up in jail 25 years, because when the revolution, Castro found out that this was happening, they put them in jail. And I particularly know my husband's aunt. She was the cousin of one of the presidents of Grau, Paula Grau, and her brother Ramon, and they ended up like 25 years in jail. And their children were here with so the family was separated. The father took the children out, and the mother was put in jail. So they sacrificed their life for us, for getting us out of Cuba.
What does that mean to you, that somebody actually sacrificed their life for you?
Well, it means a lot. It means a lot, because they had a lot of patriotism. They were fighting something, a regime that was not right, and they were willing to go to jail, to give their lives to get these children out. And some of these children are very famous now. Some of these Peter Pan children, I don't know if you know some of them, but Mel Martinez is one of them. Gloria Estefan is one of Peter Pan children. And in fact, I was reading that she was in an orphanage, Gloria Estefan. And so there were a lot of children that they move ahead. There were others that were traumatized. There were others that this traumatized them there were some of them that killed themselves. So there were all kinds of stories, some success stories and some not so successful, sad stories.
Okay. If there was one thing that you could say to your family, well, not so much your family back in Cuba, but to the people in Cuba, of Cuba, what would that be?
What I would say is that that right now I know there is a lot of they have committees of defense that they're looking over them. Everything they do they're being watched. They cannot go to the streets and protest for their liberties or for democracy. I cannot tell them to go out and fight for their freedom, because they're going to end up in jail. But so it's a very difficult situation, because here we say, why don't they go out on the streets and protest? But they are so oppressed. That's the word. That by doing that, they're going to jeopardize their family, the food. They control the food that they're gonna. So they kind of the Cuba is a big prison. So I wish they could do something. Maybe the government, the people in the government, the ones that can do something, or the military, to revolt and fight against the Castro brothers. That's what I would say to the people that have the power. Either that or try to loosen up like they're trying to do here now. They're trying to reestablish relations with Cuba and give the Cubans some freedom.
One more question. As of now, do you see yourself visiting Cuba? Have you?
I went to visit Cuba 20 years ago when they first opened because for 20 years we couldn't go back, even if we wanted to. But I had my grandmother still in Cuba, so I went and visited her. My father had already died, and I went to a town called Camagüey, and it was very sad because everything there was run down, and I was watched all the time by the Committee of Defense, and so I couldn't move freely. I was always being watched. And my grandmother was in her 90s, and she was sick, and even she lived in a house with her sisters, and there was only one left. There were originally five sisters and brothers. They have all died, and but I spent a week with her, and she still knew that I was there, but I wanted her to know that we cared about her, even though we couldn't, because she didn't want to come out at the time. She didn't want to leave Cuba because she thought she was too old to leave Cuba. So,
Faculty, staff, and students, please pardon this interruption. However, it is now time to call down for all seniors in compliance at being in school uniform and with student IDs, all seniors, regardless of alpha, to report to the auditorium for their FCAT motivational rally. Again, this is for all 12th graders in compliance at being in school uniform with school ID to report to the auditorium at this time. Thank you.
Guys, we're just going to wrap it up really quick. If you may just stay, please. You can pick up where you left off if you remember.
Okay.
Thank you.
Don't move. I want to get a picture with Miss Lago.